Looking back on it now, all these years later, I still find it impossible to fully process what happened to me out in those canyons. The memories are as vivid as the day they were forged, etched into my mind with a clarity that defies the passage of time. I am not, by nature, the kind of person who makes up tales or embellishes the truth for effect. I was raised to value honesty and plain speaking, and I've never been someone who put stock in folklore or local myths. But what I experienced that autumn changed everything I believed I understood about reality, about faith, and about the thin veil that separates our world from the mysteries that lie just beyond it. This is the account of how a Sasquatch, a Bigfoot, came to me in a moment of profound desperation, and how I, a solitary park ranger, ended up spending weeks with two creatures that most people insist don't even exist. It's an account about faith tested not by doubt, but by the unbelievable. It's a story about mercy, about discovering that reality is far more mysterious and more magnificent than we ever conceived. I'd been working as a ranger for about 6 years when I got assigned to one of the most isolated stations in the entire state forest. The position wasn't one that many people wanted. The cabin, a sturdy but Spartan structure of logs and mortar, sat precariously at the rim of a deep canyon, surrounded by dense, ancient cedar forests and steep sandstone cliffs that stretched as far as the eye could see. On clear mornings, you could watch the sunrise paint the tops of formations in 4 different directions, their sandstone glowing with a fiery red light that felt almost sacred, even in the cool air of September. The canyon itself was a labyrinth of primeval forest and rocky outcroppings, a wilderness connected by game trails that had been there longer than recorded history. My job was straightforward enough in theory, though its execution required patience and a deep respect for the wild. I was tasked with monitoring the mountain lion population as autumn approached. It was a crucial time of year for them. I had to ensure none of the territories were overlapping in a way that would lead to violent disputes, document their movements and hunting patterns as they prepared for the lean winter months, and report anything unusual to the main office, a place that felt a world away. The station had everything I needed to survive, and even thrive for months at a stretch. A reliable propane heater that kept the single room warm, even when the high-altitude temperatures dropped well below freezing. A long-range radio for my bi-weekly check-ins. Shelves, built into the cabin walls by some long-forgotten predecessor, were stocked high with canned supplies and dried goods. It was an existence defined by an isolation so profound that it could make a person either embrace their own company with fierce gratitude or lose their mind from the sheer, unending loneliness. I chose that assignment deliberately. In fact, I specifically requested it the moment the position became available. I had always been a spiritual woman, a quiet faith woven into the very fabric of my being. I grew up attending services every Sunday with my family in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's affairs, a place where faith was as common and essential as the air you breathed. My grandfather was the most faithful person I'd ever known, a man whose belief was as solid and unshakable as the mountains he loved. He gave me a simple gold locket on my 11th birthday, making me promise to never, ever remove it. I never have. That locket has been a constant presence around my neck through everything, through the awkwardness of high school and the challenges of college, through the rigors of my ranger training, through every assignment I've ever taken. It's perpetually warm from my body heat now, its surface worn smooth from the decades of my fingers touching it when I pray, or when I'm anxious, or when I simply need a tangible reminder of the love and faith that anchor me. Being out in the wilderness has always been how I feel closest to the divine. There's something about the backcountry that strips away all the static and the meaningless complications of modern life. There was no television out there, no internet, no endless scroll of bad news, no throngs of people rushing through their hectic, disconnected lives. Out there in that isolated cabin, it was just me, the canyons, and my faith. Just me and creation in its most raw, authentic, and magnificent form. Every morning, before starting my rounds, I'd sit at the small, scarred wooden table by the window, a mug of coffee warming my hands, and read from my Bible. It was a worn, leather-bound edition that my grandfather had also given me, its pages soft and thin from years of use. Every night before crawling into my bunk, I'd kneel on the cold wooden floor and say my prayers, thanking the divine for another secure day and asking for watch over my family back home, so far away. The work itself wasn't physically demanding in a brute force sort of way, though it required stamina, patience, and intense focus. I'd wake with the sunrise, make coffee on the small propane stove, eat a simple breakfast of granola or toast, and then head out into the forest. My gear was always the same: my binoculars, a camera with a powerful zoom lens, and a weatherproof notebook where I recorded everything I observed with meticulous care. I'd hike for hours, following the faint game trails and the dry, rocky creek beds, scanning the canyon floor for signs of mountain lion activity. I looked for tracks in the dust, the deep scratch marks on trees where they'd marked their territory, the scat that told me what they'd been eating, and the occasional deer or elk carcass that revealed their hunting patterns. When I could, I'd locate the lions themselves, watching them from a safe distance through my binoculars. I documented what they hunted, how they moved through their territories, whether they looked healthy or showed any signs of injury or illness. The population consisted mostly of cougars, though we'd occasionally get a transient male passing through the area, a powerful and solitary presence. I'd take photos with my camera, always careful to stay downwind and utterly silent so I wouldn't disturb them. Then, as the light began to fade, I'd return to the cabin, write up detailed logs of everything I'd observed, fill out the official forms, and radio in my reports twice a week to the main ranger station, a full 35 miles away. The isolation didn't bother me the way I knew it bothered some of the other rangers. In fact, I preferred it. I liked the profound quiet, broken only by the sound of wind sighing through the cedars, the piercing calls of red-tailed hawks circling high above, the distant mournful howling of coyotes during the night. I liked being able to think clearly without the constant interruptions and demands of civilization. I liked the simplicity of the work and the life. Wake up, do your job, study your scriptures, keep yourself fed and warm, go to sleep. It was a life reduced to its essentials, just me and the natural world, doing honest work that I believed mattered. By late September, the character of the canyon had begun to change. The temperatures had started dropping significantly at night. I'd wake up to see thick condensation on the cabin windows, my breath visible in the cold air inside, until I got the propane heater going and warmed the place up. The cottonwoods in the lower elevations had already started turning a brilliant, shimmering gold, and the first real frost had touched the higher elevations, leaving a delicate lacework of ice on the pines. The mountain lions were getting more active, more bold, taking advantage of the annual elk migration season. It was a critical time for them. If the lions didn't establish good hunting patterns before the deep cold and heavy snows set in, they might struggle through the lean months of winter. I'd been tracking several lions in particular. There was a female with 2 young, curious juveniles that looked healthy and well-fed. The mother was a master of her craft, and I watched with admiration as she taught them everything they needed to survive. How to stalk prey through the dense underbrush, how to recognize good ambush positions among the rocks, how to avoid the areas where humans sometimes hiked. There was also a large male, a magnificent beast of probably 180 pounds, with a scarred face from some old territorial fight. He spent most of his time alone, a solitary king methodically working his way through the best hunting grounds. I'd also documented a few other adults and several younger cats, all of them looking fit and ready as autumn progressed. Everything seemed normal, just another season in the canyons. The great ancient cycle of life, continuing as it had for thousands of years. Then one evening, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in breathtaking shades of crimson and gold and deep violet, I was outside the cabin chopping kindling. It was a ritual, something I did every evening. The propane heater was efficient, but I also maintained a small wood-burning fireplace for backup, and I liked to stay well ahead of my needs. The physical work felt good after a day of hiking and observing, giving me time to think and pray, while my body was occupied with the steady rhythm of swinging the hatchet and stacking the split cedar. I had my rifle leaning against the woodpile, as always. Not that I ever expected trouble, but you don't take chances when you're alone in mountain lion country. The rifle was a powerful .30-06, loaded with heavy rounds designed to stop a charging predator if it ever came to that. Though in 6 years, I'd never had to fire it at anything larger than a rattlesnake that got too close to my supply shed. Still, it was comforting to have it nearby. A tangible reminder that I could protect myself if necessary. I was focused on my work, enjoying the cool air on my face, the sharp, clean smell of fresh-cut cedar, the way the setting sun made everything glow with a warm, amber light. That's when I heard it. A sound unlike anything I'd ever heard before in all my years working in the wilderness. It started as a low rumble, almost like a moan, but deeper and more resonant. A sound that seemed to vibrate in the very marrow of my bones. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand up instantly. My skin prickled with an instinctive, primal alarm that came from somewhere deep in my primitive brain. I stopped mid-swing, the hatchet frozen above my head, and listened, every sense on high alert. The forest had gone completely, unnervingly silent. No birds chirping their evening songs, no insects buzzing in the brush, no sound at all except that deep, rumbling moan. It was the kind of heavy, profound silence that comes only when predators are near, when every small creature knows to hide and be still. And that sound, whatever it was getting closer with each passing second. Then I saw it. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me in the fading light. The shape emerging from the tree line was enormous, easily 9 feet tall, covered from head to toe in dark, reddish-brown fur that seemed to absorb the twilight. It walked upright like a human, but moved with a power and grace that was utterly inhuman, a fluid, muscular gait that spoke of immense strength. The Bigfoot was massive, with shoulders broader than any human could ever be, powerful arms that hung almost to its knees, and a face that was somewhere between human and ape, but was distinctly, shockingly, neither. My first instinct was terror, pure, unreasoning, primal fear that flooded my system with a tidal wave of adrenaline. I dropped the hatchet with a clatter and lunged for my rifle, bringing it up to my shoulder, with hands that shook so badly I could barely hold it steady. My finger found the trigger, and I prepared to fire, prepared to defend myself from whatever this impossible creature was. But then the Bigfoot did something that changed everything, something that shattered my fear and replaced it with stunned disbelief. It raised both of its massive hands in a gesture that was unmistakably universally human, a gesture of surrender or of pleading. The creature made that deep rumbling sound again, but this time it was softer, questioning, almost pleading. And then, to my absolute shock, the Bigfoot dropped to its knees in the dirt and pine needles. This massive, powerful creature, this impossible being from myth and legend, was kneeling before me in what could only be described as an act of supplication. The Bigfoot was begging. I stood there frozen, my rifle still raised, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Every rational part of my brain was screaming that this couldn't be real, that Bigfoots didn't exist, that I must be hallucinating or dreaming. But the creature was right there in front of me, as real as the trees and the rocks and the cooling air on my skin. The Bigfoot made another sound, softer now, almost a whimper. Its eyes, which were deeply intelligent and caught the last light of sunset, were fixed on me with an expression that I could only describe as desperate hope. This thing, whatever it was, needed something from me. It needed it badly enough to overcome what must have been its own deep-seated fear of humans, its own powerful survival instincts that should have kept it far away from me and my rifle. My finger stayed on the trigger, but I didn't fire. Something in those eyes stopped me. Something in that pleading gesture made me pause. And in that pause, the Bigfoot made one more sound and gestured with its head toward the forest behind it, toward the deeper, darker wilderness. The creature wanted me to follow. Every practical instinct I had, every bit of my training, told me this was insane. It told me to fire a warning shot, get back in the cabin, lock the door, and radio for help. It told me to get away from this impossible creature as fast as I could. But there was something else speaking to me in that moment. Something deeper than practical survival instincts. It was the same quiet inner voice that had always guided me in matters of faith, the same inner knowing that had brought me to this isolated assignment in the first place. The creature needed help. And despite my fear, despite the sheer impossibility of the situation, I knew with a certainty that defied all logic that I was being called to provide that help. I lowered my rifle slowly, though I kept it clutched tightly in my hands. The Bigfoot watched this action intently and made a sound that might have been relief or gratitude. Then the creature stood, moving with surprising grace for something so massive, and began walking back toward the tree line. It paused after a few steps and looked back at me, its gaze unwavering, clearly waiting, clearly expecting me to follow. I hesitated for another long moment. This could be a trap, my rational mind insisted. This could be dangerous beyond measure. But then my hand instinctively went to the locket at my throat. I felt its familiar weight and warmth, and I thought about the nature of faith. Real faith, not just the comfortable, easy kind you practice in a church pew on Sunday morning, but the kind that asks you to step into the darkness when you are called. The kind that asks you to trust, even when everything seems impossible. Moved by an instinct I didn't fully understand, I darted back into the cabin and grabbed my powerful flashlight and my fully stocked medical kit. If the creature needed help, it might be injured. And if I was actually going to follow a Bigfoot into the wilderness at twilight, I wanted to be as prepared as possible. I kept my rifle in one hand, the safety off, my finger near the trigger. Not aimed at the Bigfoot, but ready if needed. Then I took a deep breath, said a quick, fervent prayer for protection, and followed the creature into the forest. The Bigfoot moved quickly and silently through the trees, faster than I could comfortably follow, but it kept stopping and waiting for me to catch up. The creature was being deliberately careful not to lose me, showing a level of awareness and consideration that was startlingly, unnervingly human. We moved deeper and deeper into the canyon, away from the cabin, away from the trails I knew, into territory I'd never explored before. The sun had fully set now, and I was relying on the powerful beam of my flashlight and the occasional glimpses of the Bigfoot's dark, hulking form ahead of me. My heart was pounding in my chest, a frantic rhythm driven partly by the exertion of keeping up, partly by fear, and partly by the sheer, overwhelming impossibility of what I was doing. Following a Bigfoot through the wilderness at night. It sounded insane, even as I was living it. But I kept going, kept following, kept trusting that inner voice that told me this was right. We hiked for what felt like hours, but was probably only about 45 minutes. The terrain grew rougher, steeper, harder to navigate. We climbed over massive fallen logs, scrambled up rocky slopes that tore at my clothes, and pushed through dense underbrush that scratched at my face and arms. My legs were burning with fatigue, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but the Bigfoot kept moving with that same tireless, powerful pace, always waiting for me to catch up. Finally, we emerged into a small, sheltered clearing beside a massive rock overhang that formed a natural cave. And that's when I saw the second Bigfoot. This one was smaller, maybe only 3 feet tall. with lighter-colored fur that was almost a cinnamon brown in the beam of my flashlight. A baby. The baby Bigfoot was lying on the ground, curled up on a carefully constructed bed of pine needles and leaves. Even from a distance, I could tell something was terribly wrong. The little creature was shivering violently despite the relative warmth of the sheltered spot, making small, high-pitched whimpering sounds that went straight to my heart. Its breathing was labored, rapid, and shallow. The larger Bigfoot, the father I now realized, moved to the baby's side and made soft, deep, rumbling sounds, clearly trying to comfort it. Then the father Bigfoot looked back at me and gestured toward the baby with one of its huge hands, the meaning absolutely, heartbreakingly clear. "Help. Please help." I knelt beside the baby, setting down my rifle but keeping it within easy reach. Up close, I could see that the little Bigfoot's left arm was terribly swollen and discolored, the fur matted with something that looked like dried blood and pus. An infection, I realized with a sinking feeling. The baby had sustained some kind of injury, probably a deep puncture wound from a thorn or a broken branch, and it had gotten badly infected. Without treatment, it was dying. The father Bigfoot had brought me here, a human, an enemy, to save its baby's life. I looked up at the massive creature standing over us and saw raw, naked fear in its eyes. The same universal fear any parent feels when their child is sick and fading. This being, this impossible creature from folklore, was experiencing the same powerful, gut-wrenching emotions I'd see in any human parent facing their child's mortality. And it had come to me, had overcome its fear, had risked everything to ask for my help. How could I possibly refuse? I opened my medical kit with shaking hands and examined the baby's arm more closely. The wound was deep and the infection was bad, spreading up the arm in angry red streaks. Without antibiotics, this baby would likely die within a day or two. I had antibiotics in my kit, strong, broad-spectrum ones that we kept for emergencies. They were meant for humans, but the dosage could potentially be adjusted for the baby's size. It was a risk. It might not work on whatever unique biology these creatures had, or it might even make things worse. But doing nothing was a certain death sentence. I looked at the father Bigfoot and tried to communicate what I needed to do. I held up the bottle of antibiotic pills, then a syringe, and mimed giving medicine. I tried to make it understand that I wanted to help, but that the treatment might hurt the baby initially. The father watched my gestures with those incredibly intelligent eyes, then made a soft rumbling sound and stepped back slightly. Permission granted. Trust given. I spent the next hour treating the baby Bigfoot's wound. First, I cleaned the infected area as gently as I could with antiseptic wipes, wincing every time the baby whimpered in pain. The father Bigfoot hovered close, making soft, continuous sounds that seemed designed to soothe and comfort its child. Then I applied a thick layer of antibiotic ointment to the wound and bandaged it carefully with sterile gauze. Finally, I crushed several antibiotic pills, mixed them with water, calculated the dosage based on the baby's approximate weight, and administered it slowly into the corner of its mouth with an oral syringe. Through it all, the baby Bigfoot lay mostly still, seeming to understand on some primal level that I was trying to help. And the father Bigfoot never interfered, never threatened me, just watched with an intense, unwavering focus, making those soft, comforting sounds. When I was finished, I sat back on my heels, exhausted and emotionally drained, and looked at the father Bigfoot. The massive creature looked back at me, and in that moment, I felt a connection that transcended species, that transcended logic. We were two beings from different worlds, united by our shared care for this small, sick child. The father Bigfoot made a sound, different from the others, a sound that I was certain meant gratitude. Then the creature did something that made my breath catch in my throat. it reached out one massive hand and gently, so carefully, touched the locket at my throat. It just touched it with the tip of one finger, the gesture deliberate and deeply meaningful. It was acknowledging something, recognizing something. My faith, perhaps, or the care I'd shown, or maybe just expressing thanks in the only way it knew how. Then the Bigfoot pulled its hand back and looked at me expectantly. It took me a moment to understand what the creature wanted, but then it became clear. The baby needed continued care. It needed multiple doses of antibiotics over several days to fight off the infection completely. The father Bigfoot wanted me to bring them to my cabin. It wanted us to stay together where I could treat the baby properly. The idea was both terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. Bring two Bigfoots to my ranger station? Keep them there for days, maybe weeks? It went against every protocol, every rule, every shred of common sense I possessed. But looking at that sick, shivering baby, looking at the desperate hope in the father's eyes, I knew what I had to do. I nodded and gestured back toward the direction of the cabin. The father Bigfoot understood immediately. It bent down and carefully, so very carefully, lifted the baby into its powerful arms. The little one whimpered softly, but seemed to relax against its father's broad chest. Then we began the long trek back to the cabin, the three of us moving through the dark forest together, an impossible family bound by need and trust, and something I didn't yet have words for. Getting back to the cabin took even longer than the trip out. The father Bigfoot moved more slowly now, careful not to jostle the baby. I led the way with my flashlight, finding the easiest paths, helping to push aside low-hanging branches that might scratch or scrape. When we finally emerged from the tree line and approached the warm, welcoming light of the cabin, I half expected the father to balk, to refuse to enter a human dwelling. But the creature followed me right to the door, ducked its massive head to fit through the frame, and entered without a moment's hesitation. Inside, by the bright, steady light of my lanterns, I could see both Bigfoots more clearly. The father was truly massive, with powerful muscles that rippled under its thick fur, and hands that could probably crush a human skull without effort. But those same hands held the baby with infinite gentleness, and those deep-set eyes showed an intelligence and a depth of emotion that was unmistakably conscious, unmistakably aware. The baby was beautiful in its own strange way, with delicate features and that soft, cinnamon-colored fur. Despite the fever and pain, it watched me with curious dark eyes that seemed to be taking in every detail of this strange new place. I set up a makeshift bed for them in the corner of the cabin, using all my spare blankets and my sleeping bag to create a soft, warm nest. The father Bigfoot settled there with the baby cradled against its chest, and I brought them water in my largest mixing bowl. The father drank some and then patiently helped the baby drink, showing the same tender care any human parent would. Over the next 2 weeks, the cabin became a strange and sacred sanctuary, a place where the impossible became routine. 3 times a day, I treated the baby's infection with antibiotics and careful wound care. The father Bigfoot watched every single treatment, learning what I was doing, and eventually began helping, holding the baby still when needed, or bringing me supplies from the kit before I even asked for them. The creature was remarkably intelligent, able to understand my gestures and intentions with minimal repetition. We developed a kind of communication, not with words, but with a complex language of sounds, gestures, and expressions. The father would make different rumbling sounds that I came to recognize as meaning different things. One sound meant the baby was in pain, another meant thank you, another meant the creature needed to go outside, presumably to hunt or relieve itself. And I would respond with my own sounds and gestures, creating a primitive but effective language between us. I learned that the father Bigfoot was mostly vegetarian, though it did eat insects and small creatures occasionally. It would leave the cabin at night to forage, always returning before dawn with strange roots and plants that it would share with me. Some of them I recognized as edible, others were completely unfamiliar. The Bigfoot seemed to be teaching me, showing me what was safe to eat in this forest, expanding my knowledge in ways my ranger training never had. The baby improved steadily. By the third day, the fever had broken. By the fifth day, it was able to sit up and take more interest in its surroundings. By the end of the first week, the little Bigfoot was playing with things in the cabin, driven by a toddler's curiosity about everything from my books to my cooking utensils. The baby was particularly fascinated by my locket, reaching for it with small, delicate hands whenever I came close. I'd let the baby hold it sometimes, watching as those tiny fingers traced the engraving, seeing pure wonder in those dark eyes. The father would watch these interactions with what I could only describe as approval, making soft, pleased sounds. It was creating a bond between us, this shared care for the baby. The father Bigfoot trusted me completely now. It would rest while I watched over the baby and would leave for longer periods to forage, knowing I would keep the little ones safe. And I, in turn, found myself caring deeply for both of them. These impossible creatures that had become something like a temporary family during our time together. I continued my ranger duties as best I could, but everything had changed. I'd radio in my reports and speak in vague terms about being unable to travel far due to a minor sprained ankle, buying myself time. I couldn't exactly tell my supervisors that I was nursing a baby Bigfoot back to health while hosting its father in my station. They'd think I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had, but it was the most meaningful and profound thing I'd ever done. During the quiet moments, usually in the evening after I'd treated the baby's wound and we'd all eaten, I would read from my Bible. The father Bigfoot would watch me during these times, its massive head tilted slightly, clearly listening even if it couldn't understand the words. There was something reverential in the creature's attention, something that made me think it recognized the spiritual nature of what I was doing, even without comprehending the specifics. Sometimes I would pray aloud, thanking the divine for bringing these creatures to me, asking for continued healing for the baby, expressing my gratitude for this extraordinary experience. And the father Bigfoot would make soft, rumbling sounds during my prayers, sounds that felt like the creature was adding its own voice to mine. We were praying together, this impossible being and I, united in our care for the baby and our recognition of something greater than ourselves. I learned so much during those 2 weeks. I learned that intelligence and consciousness aren't uniquely human traits. The father Bigfoot showed problem-solving abilities that were remarkable. Figuring out how to work the latch on my storage chest, understanding the cause and effect of my lanterns, even learning to help me with tasks like bringing in firewood. I learned that love and parental devotion are universal forces transcending species. The way the father Bigfoot cared for its baby was identical to how any human parent would care for their sick child, with endless patience, constant vigilance, and a willingness to do anything to ease the baby's suffering. I learned that communication is possible even without a shared language. We found ways to understand each other that went deeper than words. And I learned that the world is far stranger and more wonderful than any of us imagine. These creatures exist, living in the hidden places, conscious and intelligent and worthy of our deepest respect. They have their own lives, their own societies, perhaps, their own ways of understanding the world, and we share this planet with them, mostly unaware of their presence, separated only by fear and misunderstanding. By the end of the second week, the baby was fully recovered. The infection was gone, the wound was healing cleanly, and the little Bigfoot was active and playful again. It would tumble around the cabin, exploring everything, making happy chirping sounds that brought joy to both me and the father. It was time for them to return to the wilderness. I knew it, and the father Bigfoot knew it too. We couldn't continue this strange coexistence indefinitely. The father had responsibilities in the wild, territory to maintain, and food to gather for the coming winter. And the baby needed to learn how to be a Bigfoot, needed to grow up in its natural environment. Keeping them here any longer would be selfish, putting my desire for their company above their needs. On the morning they left, I prepared a small bundle of supplies for them. I gave them my best wool blanket, thinking they could use it for warmth or for carrying things. I gave them some of my non-perishable food, dried fruits and nuts that would keep. I even gave them a small first aid kit, hoping the father might remember how I'd used the supplies and could help the baby if needed in the future. The father Bigfoot accepted these gifts with that same gesture of gratitude I'd come to recognize, touching the locket at my throat one last time before pulling away. The baby reached for me, and I picked up the little creature one last time, holding it close and feeling the softness of its fur, the warmth of its small body against my chest. The baby made soft sounds and touched my face with its tiny hands as if memorizing me. I kissed the top of its head, not caring how strange that might seem, and whispered a prayer for its safety and health. Then I handed the baby back to its father, and we walked to the door together. The sun was just rising, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and pink. The father Bigfoot paused at the threshold, looked back at me one last time, and made a sound that was clearly unmistakably goodbye. Then the creature, cradling the baby against its chest and carrying the supplies I'd given, walked into the forest and disappeared into the trees. I stood there watching until I could no longer see them, until the forest had swallowed them completely. Part of me wanted to follow, to see where they went, to learn more about these incredible creatures and how they lived. But I knew that wasn't right. They had trusted me with something precious, the baby's life, and now it was time to let them return to their own world, to respect their privacy and their need for secrecy. They had trusted me, and I would not betray that trust. I closed the door finally and went back inside. The cabin felt cavernously empty now, too quiet after having the constant presence of the Bigfoots for 2 weeks. I could see the impression where the father had sat on the floor, could see the small indent the baby had left on my bunk. These small reminders of an experience that already felt like it might have been a dream. But I knew it was real. I knew what I'd experienced, what I'd learned, how I'd been changed by knowing these creatures. And as I stood there in the empty cabin, I touched the locket around my neck and whispered a prayer of thanks. Thanks for being led to help when I didn't understand what was happening. Thanks for the courage to follow the father into the dark forest that first night. Thanks for the privilege of knowing these incredible creatures, even if only for a short time. And thanks for the profound reminder that reality is bigger and stranger and more wonderful than we can ever imagine, that there are mysteries in the wilderness that we'll never fully understand, and that sometimes the most important thing we can possibly do is simply show kindness when someone needs our help. Life went back to normal after that, or as normal as it could ever be after what I'd experienced. I continued my work monitoring the mountain lions, filling out my reports, doing my job, but everything felt different now. Every time I went into the forest, I'd look for signs of the Bigfoots, hoping for just one more glimpse of them. Sometimes I'd see a massive footprint in soft earth, far bigger than any mountain lion print, and wonder if it was the father. I'd find a tree with bark stripped away at a height too high for any known animal to reach, and think of the baby, grown bigger now. I'd hear a sound in the distance that might have been a Bigfoot calling to another, and I'd stop and listen, my heart aching with a strange mix of hope and loss. But I never saw them again. The father and the baby had gone back to wherever they came from, back to their hidden world that exists parallel to ours. Part of me was deeply sad about that, grieving the loss of their presence, even though I knew it was right for them to leave. But mostly, I was grateful. Grateful that I had been there to help when they needed it most. Grateful for the experience and everything it had taught me, grateful that they had trusted me, a human, enough to come to me in their hour of greatest need. I never told a single soul what happened, not my family, not my fellow rangers, not anyone who would possibly believe me. Even now, years later, I hesitate to share this account. People would think I was unbalanced or a liar, or that I'd simply been alone in the canyons too long and my mind had played tricks on me. They'd demand proof, photographs or physical evidence, something concrete. But I have no proof except my memories and the unshakable knowledge in my heart that it was all real. The antibiotics I used on the baby are gone from my first aid kit. The blanket I gave the father is gone. The impressions they left in my cabin have long since faded. But sometimes, even now, I find a single long strand of reddish-brown fur caught on the rough edge of my bunk, or a massive, inexplicable footprint in the dust near my cabin that couldn't belong to any known animal. And I know it was real. I know the father and the baby were here. I know what we shared during those 2 weeks. And that knowledge is enough. It has to be enough, because some things are more important than proof or recognition. Some experiences are meant to be private, meant to be held close to your heart rather than shouted from the rooftops. The Father trusted me with its most precious thing, its baby's life, and I will honor that trust by keeping their secret, by protecting them the only way I can, through silence and discretion. That autumn in the canyons, those 2 weeks with the father and the baby, changed everything I thought I knew about the world. It taught me that there are profound mysteries in the wilderness that science has not yet discovered, creatures that live in the hidden places, intelligence and consciousness in forms we don't recognize. It taught me that kindness and compassion are not uniquely human traits, but something deeper, something universal that crosses all boundaries of species and understanding. It taught me that faith means choosing to help even when you're terrified, even when nothing makes sense, even when you don't know if what you're doing will work. Most of all, it taught me that we are not alone in this world in the way we think we are. There are other forms of consciousness sharing this planet with us, other beings with their own lives and societies and ways of understanding the world. The Father showed me that. The creature showed me intelligence and love and a capacity for communication that transcended species, that reminded me all living things deserve our respect, our protection, and our compassion. I still wear my grandfather's locket around my neck. I still read my Bible every morning and say my prayers every night. But now when I pray, I include the father and the baby in my thoughts. I don't know if Bigfoots have souls the way humans do. I don't know how they fit into any specific religious framework or belief system. But I know they are part of creation. Just like everything else in this world, they deserve respect and protection and kindness, just like any other living thing. They deserve to live in peace in their hidden world, free from human interference and exploitation. Sometimes on quiet nights at the ranger station, I'll hear a sound in the distance, a low rumble, almost like the sounds the father used to make. I'll go to the window and look out at the forest, at the dark, silent shapes of the cedars against the star-filled sky. And I'll wonder if it's the father and the baby out there, somewhere in their hidden world. I'll wonder if they remember me the way I remember them. I'll wonder if they're safe and healthy and thriving in the wilderness they call home. I like to think they're doing well. I imagine the baby grown bigger now, strong and confident, perhaps with young ones of its own. I imagine the father teaching the baby everything it needs to know to survive in these canyons, how to find food, how to stay hidden from humans, how to live in harmony with the great, ancient rhythms of the natural world. And maybe, just maybe, the father sometimes tells the baby about the autumn when it was sick, about the human who helped, about the strange, warm time they spent in a cabin with someone who should have been their enemy but chose instead to be their friend. That's my hope, anyway. That's my prayer, that the father and the baby will be able to live in peace, hidden and safe for as long as they need these canyons to shelter them. That's the least I can do for the creatures who taught me so much about compassion and trust and the deep, abiding mysteries of the natural world. That's the only way I know how to honor what we shared during those 2 impossible, wonderful weeks. The wilderness is still here, as wild and beautiful as ever. The mountain lions I monitor are doing well, preparing for another winter just like they do every year. The cycle continues. And somewhere out there in the hidden places, in the secret valleys and remote forests, I believe the father and the baby are continuing their cycle too, living their lives in peace, raising their families, being a part of the wilderness in a way that most humans will never see or understand. And that is exactly how it should be.